Diminished scales. They're such a great tool for creating some interesting tension in jazz improvisation. Even John Coltrane used it often. Michael Brecker as well used it all the time. And diminished scales are also kind of strange, but in a really neat way. For starters, there's 8 notes in the scale, rather than the typical 7 like in major or minor scales. And so you would think, oh, okay, that means there's 8 diatonic 7th chords this time, right? No! There's actually 28 diatonic 7th chords within this one 8-note scale. And to top it all off, for whatever collection of notes you were to find inside of a diminished scale, like say a 4-note melodic cell, you'll find that exact same cell perfectly transposed in 3 different keys within that same scale. Okay, how is any of this possible? Well, we're about to dive in all this today, and actually everything that we discussed today can already be found in our PDF resources here at Jazz Lesson Videos, 15 exercises for diminished scale technique, as well as 65 shredding diminished phrases, both written by Chad LB. All this information is conveniently written out for you in all 12 keys, and you can find the link to download them in the description below and use code DIM5 for $5 off. Okay, so if you already know what diminished scales are, feel free to skip to this portion of the video to get to the exercises. Over there, we'll go over 3 great exercises to build a strong foundation within these scales. And then right after, we'll look at 4 practical lines that demonstrate how to construct phrases using the diminished scale in a jazz improvisation context. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. What is the diminished scale? The scale was conceived in 1879, before jazz even existed, and it was discovered using mathematics. Some sources even say that this scale can be found in traditional Persian music from the 7th century. The inherent strange qualities of the diminished scale that I mentioned earlier in this video are all made possible because it is what is known as a symmetrical scale. There are many types of symmetrical scales, but because the focus of this video is on the diminished scale, we'll just focus on this one for now. So what is a symmetrical scale? A symmetrical scale is a scale in which its intervallic content will perfectly divide the octave in half. Okay, what does any of that mean? Let's simplify that sentence. Take a C. Now take another C up an octave. Ta-da, we got an octave. How many chromatic steps, aka what is the intervallic distance between an octave? Well, there are 12 different musical notes, at least in Western music, before you reach an octave. So the answer is 12. So now, what is the midpoint of this distance? That would mean you divide 12 chromatic steps in half. That gives you 6. And the pitch that is the result that sits here right at this midpoint is the tritone, also known as the sharp 4 or the flat 5. So now check this out. We're going to create a diminished scale really easily with this framework in mind. Here we go. Starting on this first C, we're going to input the first 4 notes of the C minor scale. C, D, E flat, and F. 1, 2, flat 3, and 4. Now, starting on this tritone, we're going to do the exact same thing, but in the key of F sharp minor. So here are the first 4 notes of F sharp minor. 1, 2, flat 3, 4. F sharp, G sharp, A, and B. This resulting scale has 8 different notes. This scale is a symmetrical scale, particularly the one that is called a whole half diminished scale. This is because the first interval here between the first 2 notes is a whole step. The next note goes up a half step. Then the next is a whole step. Then next is a half step, whole step, half step, whole step, etc. It goes on forever. The C whole half diminished scale can reliably be played over a C diminished 7 chord. Now, this brings us to another important point. The diminished scale is also considered a mode of limited transposition. This is because if we take this intervallic pattern of alternating whole steps and half steps and transpose it all up a minor third, starting us now on an E flat, or up a minor third again, starting on an F sharp, or up a minor third again, starting on an A. We can't go up another minor third because then we'll just land right back on C and this infinite loop continues. So we're left with these 4 transpositions, C, E flat, F sharp, and A. And you'll notice there's a phenomenon happening. From each of these 4 starting points, you are left with the exact same scale. All of these scales share the exact same intervals. 1, 2, flat 3, 4, flat 5, sharp 5, 6, and 7. Pretty interesting. So this means that if you practice the C whole half diminished scale all the way up and down the full range of your instrument, then you have also just practiced the E flat whole half diminished scale, and the F sharp whole half diminished scale, and the A whole half diminished scale. They're all the same. You just practice 4 keys at once. So 12 keys minus 4, that leaves us with 8 keys left. And if one diminished scale covers 4 keys, and we got 8 keys left, that means 8 divided by 4 is there are 2 scales left to practice. So to find those, they're just a chromatic step apart. So C sharp whole half diminished scale, you would want to practice that one in your entire range, and then go up a half step again to the D whole half diminished scale, and you want to practice in that entire range. These 3 scales has you practicing all 12 keys at the same time, hence why it is called a mode of limited transposition. Awesome! So there's actually one other form of diminished scale, and this would be called the half-whole diminished scale. The good news is, since we just learned the whole half diminished scale, we already learned the half-whole diminished scale as well. I'll show you how. If we take a look again at our C whole half diminished scale, we see that the intervallic steps are whole, half, etc. Now what happens if we start on the second note, D, as if we were thinking of this as the second mode? Now our intervals are inverted, starting off with the half step interval, then whole, half, etc. This scale here is the D half whole diminished scale. Pretty neat. So let's go back to the whole half diminished scale and let's observe all of the diatonic 7th chords found within this scale. Right off the bat, from every single scale tone, you can build a fully diminished 7th chord. Now, there are some other possible chords thanks to it being an 8-note scale. On the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th scale degrees, you'll find that you can build a diminished major 7 chord. How to build this is to think of a diminished triad, 1, flat 3, flat 5, and then add a major 7th on top of it. If you play all of them next to each other, you'll get this really cool pattern that Michael Brecker played all the time. On the other scale degrees, the 2nd, 4th, 6th, and 8th pitches, you'll find also the half diminished 7th chord, the minor 7th chord, the dominant 7th chord, and though this one is not as commonly thought of, you also have the dominant 7 flat 5 chord. The diminished scale is indeed a scale you can draw from when you're playing over a 5-7 chord and you want some extra tension. Let's take a look at this D7 chord. You can easily think, oh, on a D7, we can play the D half-whole diminished scale. When you think of it this way, then it's worth knowing that this is popularly coined as a dominant diminished scale. And this chord would be considered a D dominant diminished chord. You'll probably hear this term a lot within the jazz theory realm, so keep this in mind. I've also heard from people who prefer to think from the whole half diminished scale that they just play the whole half diminished scale from the flat 7. Really, whatever floats your boat works, but definitely thinking of the half whole diminished scale from the root is the most common nowadays, specifically for dominant diminished chords. This would also be a scale option over half diminished chords, so if you were to have a B half diminished 7, you could play the B half whole diminished scale. Not as common, but it's an option. Okay, going back to the dominant diminished, let's take our D7. If we were going to access the diminished scale, what would be all of the available extensions on this chord? You'll see that you can add a flat 9, sharp 9, sharp 11, and a natural 13. This is a very popular sound in jazz music. This is implied when you see a chord like D13 sharp 9 or a D7 flat 9 natural 13. Take note that what truly makes this dominant chord exclusively a diminished sound is that it has an altered ninth, either flat 9 or sharp 9, or both, and a natural 13. If you see any form of dominant chord with a natural ninth and or a flat 13, that is a dead giveaway that it is not from the diminished scale. I repeat, a dominant chord with a flat 13 or a natural ninth is not from a diminished scale. So all this is worth keeping in mind. All right, so just a quick recap. If we take a look at all of the diatonic seventh chords, we'll see that there is a whopping 28 different seventh chords. Pretty cool. Okay, that concludes the theory portion of the video. I always find that it's great to understand the theory behind something before you put a lot of hours into practicing it. But as you know, once you have the theory down, it doesn't really help you live on that stage. From that point, you got to get that sound in your fingers, in your ears. So much so that you don't even need to think of any of the theory at all anymore. And that comes from practicing great exercises and examples over a good chunk of time. So let's go ahead and look at 3 really strong exercises to build a foundation in this scale. And then we'll look at 4 really cool practical examples of playing this scale over dominant diminished chords. Here's the first exercise we'll look at. This comes from Chad LB's PDF resource, 15 exercises for diminished scale technique. And it can be found on page 8. First, let's play it, and then we'll break it down. So what's going on here? Essentially, this is a way to master the diminished scale in a linear scalar fashion. We go up the first 5 notes of the scale, then walk down 2 notes, then end it by going back up 1 note. Then at the start of the next measure, we'll play the second scale degree and repeat this pattern, etc. Then on the descending version, rather than going up 5 notes, we are instead going to go up 4 notes. Then we'll go down 3 notes and finally go up 1 note to complete the pattern. Here it is all together. Great. Great, this is a nice starter exercise to really ensure that you can play this scale in a linear fashion throughout all registers of your instrument. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the second exercise. This one is found on page 7 of the book. Let's play it, then break it down. So what's going on here? These are diatonic diminished triads. From every scale degree of the diminished scale, we're going to play up and down its diminished triad. Each 4-note cell is a repeat of this pattern. Here's the 1, flat 3, 5, flat 3 of the C diminished triad. Then here it is for the D diminished triad, the E flat diminished triad, F diminished, etc. Let's hear it all together again. Awesome! This is a really valuable exercise as it'll get the sound of these interweaving diatonic diminished triads in your fingers and, more importantly, in your ears. Okay, we're going to move on to another exercise, but this one is more of an idiomatic pattern. This one was really made famous by John Coltrane in his recording of Moment's Notice. This pattern can be found on page 6 of Chad LB's 15 exercises for diminished scale technique. Chad actually extends the pattern so that an ascending version is also displayed. Let's take a listen, then break down what's happening. So what's going on here? Within the C half-whole diminished scale, we're going to play the first 2 notes. Then we're going to skip up a tritone and play 2 notes from there. Now we're going to take this entire 4-note cell and move it up a minor third. This pattern will repeat. Then we'll do this again and again, descending up the horn. For the descending version, we're going to do the same thing, except now, from the first degree, we're going to walk down a scale tone rather than up. Then we'll skip down a tritone and do it again. Now we have our complete 4-note cell, and we will transpose this down in minor thirds. Here it is all together. Incredible. This pattern, particularly the descending version, not so much the ascending version, is such a popular pattern that it's even considered cliche. Some of your audience, if you whip this out, will be like, ah! And other members of your audience might be like, really? Really? Come on. Either way, it's certainly established as jazz vocabulary, so it's better to know it than to not know it. Alright, so all of those fundamental foundational exercises all come from Chad LB's PDF resource 15 exercises for diminished scale technique. Again, you can find it in the description below and use the code DIM5 for $5 off. Now we're going to transition and take a look at 4 practical diminished scale phrases. All of these will come from the whopping 65 shredding diminished phrases, also written by Chad LB. The first example we'll go over can be found on page 1. Let's listen to it, then break it down. Awesome! So this can be played over a C7 flat 9 chord, but as we mentioned earlier in the video, for whatever is established within a diminished scale, you could also play it in 3 additional transpositions that are all a minor third apart. So 12 different chords that this single line would sound great on. Hopefully that illustrates the power of the diminished scale. Anyway, to analyze the line itself, all of it is completely diatonic to the scale, as all of the examples in the first section of the book aim to display. Of the C half-whole diminished scale, we start off with a 1, 2, 3, 5 shape. walk down 3 notes, walk up 1, a 3-note enclosure here that targets the B flat, a diminished major 7 shape starting on its 7 and arpeggiating up till we reach 7, then turns into a 2-note diatonic enclosure around G, then we have a 2-note diatonic enclosure around B flat, and then a 2-note approach to the root. We finally descend down a major triad, but at a flat 9 before we get back to the root, just for that extra spice and dissonance. Let's hear this line again. Amazing. So that was a diatonic example of how to construct a line using this scale. Now let's go ahead and observe an example of using this diminished scale and notes outside of the scale using chromaticism. This one comes from the next section of the book found on page 2. Pretty neat. Again, we use the C half-whole diminished scale, but now with sprinkles of chromaticism. We can see on beats 3 and 4 of the first measure a 4-note chromatic enclosure that targets the F sharp. Right after it, a chromatic approach tone, D, that approaches the E flat. Starting on beat 1 of measure 4, another 4-note chromatic enclosure that targets C. And this ends up being another chromatic enclosure too, targeting this A. Then from here, we go up, then down the chromatic scale till we land on the 5, and end it off with the good old major third. Let's hear it one more time. Awesome. So those were 2 examples of using the diminished scale over static chords. Let's go ahead and now listen to examples of how this scale can be used over typical chord progressions commonly found in jazz standards. This way we'll really hear the contrast that this scale is able to provide. Here's a phrase over a 2-5-1 chord progression found on page 3 of Chad LB's 65 Shredding Diminished Phrases. Really neat. So what's going on here? Over the D minor 7, we start off playing notes of D minor, 1, 2, and flat 3. Then right off the bat, we anticipate the G dominant diminished chord by playing the scale early before that chord even arrives. Within the frame of that scale, we play a diatonic 2-note enclosure around A flat, a 2-note approach from above to the B flat, and this B flat ends up being the major 7 of a B diminished major 7 shape here. And when we reach that B flat again up top, we simply walk down the scale and it smoothly voice leads itself to the major third. Now we're in the tonality of C major, playing 3-5, diatonic enclosure around the root, a 1-2-3-5 shape, a leading tone of the root, and finally the root itself. Let's hear all this one more time. Incredible. So the final example that we'll look at today comes from page 10 of 65 Shredding Diminished Phrases by Chad LB. This takes place over the first 4 bars of It Could Happen to You. The chord's root movement gradually ascends in chromatic steps, with the transitionary passing chords being the diminished chords here. Eventually, it finally resolves back to the 1 chord. Let's hear how this sounds. This is a great example of using the diminished scale in a very melodic way. We start off playing the 5 of C major, then a chromatic approach note that begins a rootless C major 9 arpeggio here. Or you can just think of this as the E minor 7 arpeggio. Or you could also just think of this as an upper structure from the 3rd of your major 7 chord. Then we descend the major scale, arpeggiate down to the B flat diminished triad found within the D flat whole half diminished scale. Then starting on E flat, we walk down the scale, smoothly voice leading onto the 5 of D minor 7. We play a permutation of an F major 7 shape, but replace F with its 9th. And this sound works nicely over a D minor 7 chord. We then land on F and play a 1-2-3-5 shape here, and continue this ascending trajectory onto an E flat inside the E flat diminished 7th chord. Within the E flat whole half diminished scale, we now play a 4-note diatonic enclosure around C. But this also ends up being a C diminished major 7 shape, starting on the 7 and arpeggiating up to the 7 of both this shape and the destination chord, the C major 7. We ended off by just walking down the C major scale, omitting the avoid tone, aka the perfect fourth. Let's hear all this one more time. Amazing! That concludes today's video. Again, if you're interested in either of those PDF resources, you can find the link in the description below and use code DIM5 for $5 off. Well everyone, thanks so much for watching. I really hope this video helped. If it did, please leave a like and subscribe below, as it really helps this channel grow, as well as comment what else you might like to see from us in the future. As always, see you all next time.